You ready to go?
I'm still, my friend.
Hey, all this football that I want to talk about, but we got to start with basketball because you were on the call last night, and, of course, we talk so much about the dynasty Alabama's built in college football, but the greatest dynasty right now in collegiate sports remains the UConn women's basketball program. But they failed to win the national championship the last 2 years, but still, and even though I know Baylor's a really good team, and I know they have a dominant inside game, I'm still wrapping my arms around the fact that UConn had their 126-game regular season winning streak snapped last night by the Baylor Bears and Kim Mulkey, who is a terrific coach. But I guess the thing, as I was reading up this morning early to get ready for this interview with you, was 52-10 in the paint. I know this is more of a perimeter-based team for UConn, but I still can't wrap my arms around the fact that they were outscored 52-10 in the paint. And I guess when you get outscored 52-10 in the paint, no matter what your pedigree is, no matter how well coached you are, no matter how many good players you have, you're going to lose, right?
Yeah, and I think that one thing that we also tried to recognize last night was outside of the dominant paint performance, and you can understand why they have two veterans in the paint, Baylor does, and Kalani Brown and Lauren Cox, who last night were just terrific. 31 points, 24 rebounds. Cox had 5 shot blocks. They obviously provide multiple issues, and Gino Auriemma knew that. I mean, Baylor was one of the teams that I thought last year could beat UConn. And they didn't obviously get a chance to play them in the regular season, and they got eliminated before they got a chance to get to the Final Four. So I thought they were actually one of the worst matchups for UConn because of the things that we saw on display last night. But make no mistake, Baylor's been one of the better defensive teams in the country the last few years, and they did it on the perimeter as well. They held UConn's leading scorer in check, Katie Lou Samuelson. Their length and quickness was on display on the perimeter, but it was also their intelligence. They made UConn have to make difficult decisions. They forced them to adjust to their tempo at the defensive end, and then obviously they dominated the inside game, which we expected. So it is about matchups. It is about having the best draw possible. But listen, UConn is not it's not infallible, and I think that's something that Alabama fans have learned in the past too. Like, as great as Nick Saban is as a coach, as premier as the talent is on the field of play, sometimes the matchup isn't great for you. Sometimes the other team plays a better game, and Baylor did both of those things last night, in particular against the interior of what UConn has. And yeah, this is still a dynasty. I know they haven't won the title in the last 2 seasons, but UConn is the elite of the elite, as Kim Mulkey aptly put it last night. Everybody's still chasing UConn. And I think this is one of those things that's probably good for UConn, in all honesty. There's a lot of pressure when you go to UConn, when you're a player there, that goes into being a player there with the streaks, with the championships. I always think it's kind of a good reset button. And Baylor earned that win last night. And there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's good for college basketball, particularly women's basketball. I want to see UConn in the Final Four because of the dynasty, but I like it when teams are able to go toe-to-toe with them. And I like that there's a little bit more parity in women's college basketball this year than maybe there ever has.
Yeah, final 68-57. Baylor gets it done. 126-game regular season winning streak snapped. 126 wins in a row. Can you put that in some type of perspective? That's incredible.
Yeah, it's 205 wins in their last 209 games. So that's 4 losses, 205 and 4 over the last 209 games. And the 3 losses prior to last night all came in overtime games, all of them, including the last two Final Fours, a loss in overtime at Stanford to start the 2014-2015 season, and then last night. To be able to pinpoint 4 games in a 209-game span should be mind-boggling in and of itself. So the fact is that it's such a rarity that we've been able to pinpoint moments like that over the course of the last 4 or 5 seasons. So it's incredible, this type of push. Obviously, during that stretch, they had that 111-game win streak with a couple of titles. And then, Morgan Williams, you remember, Gary, put that to an end a couple of years ago in the Final Four. It's an incredible run. It is still, as much as I respect Nick Saban and Alabama and what they've done over the course of the better part of the last decade, UConn is still the most mind-boggling program in terms of its success and level of success comparative to the rest of the country. Now that being said, I like that Clemson challenges Alabama. I like that, Gary. I like that these two teams are playing for a fourth time. I know some people might be fatigued by it, but we're appreciating what the excellence of all this is, and I think that's what it is when you talk about the Warriors dynasty, when you talk about New England over the course of 16, 17 seasons, when you talk about UConn basketball, when you talk about Alabama. I think it's good to have some bar set at some point that other teams will try to knock down. And I think if people look at it with that perspective, I think you can be more appreciative of what we're witnessing, even though, it's just Alabama and Clemson again. It's the Patriots again. It's the Warriors again. I think you can appreciate it when you take a step back and look at it like that.
Absolutely, and we're certainly going to get into Alabama and Clemson in a moment. But while you were calling that great college basketball game on the women's side, there were a couple of really big NBA games. Let's start with the Warriors, because everybody continues to say Golden State's still the favorite. Golden State's still this. Golden State's still that. Well, Golden State's not what they've been the last few years, clearly. Doesn't mean they can't turn it on. But last night, they blew a 20-point lead at home. James Harden hits what Steve Kerr called an impossible shot, about 29 feet to win it. Crazy game, 135-134. Harden, who's having a phenomenal year, goes for 44, 15 assists and 10 rebounds. And this is just inexplicable. This is the type of game that the Warriors didn't used to lose, and now they're losing. I mean, at some point, I know they're still the team to beat, but there are other good teams. There are other teams that have proven this season that they can play with the Warriors, and every time Golden State loses a game like this, you start to say, well, maybe they're not the team to beat. What do you think?
Well, I still feel like what James Harden does is, I know we've said this about LeBron in the past, and I still feel like that it's probably true for a little bit longer, but James Harden is the hardest guard to defend in the NBA. Even, and I'll put LeBron as I won't count LeBron as a guard, even though he truly is a guard, point guard in many ways. I look at him and his body type and the way he's built as just kind of a free-flowing player. So specifically as a guard, I think James Harden has clearly established himself as the most difficult to defend in the NBA. When Daryl Morey, who I think has a very acute basketball mind, the GM of the Houston Rockets, a guy who looks at both sides of the picture, has the eye test, and also has a keen eye towards analytics. When he says you could argue for James Harden being the best offensive player of all time, based on not just the numbers that he puts up, which I know a lot of people misinterpret what Daryl Morey said because he is so analytics-driven. He was talking about the skill set and the different things that James Harden does to allow him to have space and freedom to score almost at will. I can understand why he's saying that. I honestly can't. I'm not sold on it yet. I don't think necessarily that's true just yet. But based on the skill set that we see, he is the most difficult guard to defend in the NBA right now. And he is the reason, without Chris Paul, with a lineup that has lost some luster, Ariz is gone, this is still a dangerous offensive team. And they have defensive building blocks on the back end, too, and Capella obviously sticks out. But the West is so jumbled this year that it's going to be the star of stars who drives this conference to the NBA Finals. This is what we've said about LeBron James in the East over the last, however many years, that the reason Cleveland has been able to make their runs with LeBron James has been because he is the killer. He is the star of stars, and obviously now he's in the West. That's what it's going to take in the West now with so much parity, with so many of these teams. Right now, 13, 14 teams are alive for 8 playoff spots. Outside of Phoenix, who's going to have some talent added over the course of the next couple of years, there's nobody in that conference that I'm really convinced can't make the playoffs right now. So in a jumble like that, you need the star of stars. You need the elite of the elite. And right now, he's proven himself as the elite of the elite. And that means that Houston is a dangerous force to try to make the NBA Finals this year. And it's been a long time coming for them. And they came close last year. Had it not been for that Chris Paul injury, that might have been the year that they go. This is what Houston is going to be built off of. If James Harden is healthy, I'm petrified if I'm anybody else in the West in terms of how I'm going to guard him on a nightly basis, especially in a 7-game series where maybe he has one bad game but consistently he's probably going to produce at a really high level.
Adam, you follow it closely. Do you just sense something's not right with Golden State, whether it's Draymond physically seems like he's not quite the player that he was. Durant doesn't seem to be as happy maybe as he should be. It just doesn't seem like they're the team that they've been, not just in terms of the losses, but in terms of where they play and the fun that they used to have on the court, and maybe a couple of the support players that are not with this team. I just sense that there's not the same chemistry and camaraderie among that group that we've seen in the past. You agree?
I agree 100%, Gary. I think I think this is typical of NBA teams as they go further down the line. Like this is the disease of me, and I'm not calling particular players out, oh, they're selfish or they don't care. No, the disease of me is not necessarily a selfish thing. The disease of me has to do with, well, what how do I become the better version of myself in the NBA? And not to say that guys don't want to be a part of the team, guys don't want to contribute in a major fashion. They just don't want to contribute in the same roles year in and year out, because a lot of these guys at a competitive level don't want to stagnate. And that's one thing that I've always appreciated about Steph Curry is his willingness to keep improving, keep working. But when you hit a certain level, maybe even an apex of what you can do physically as a basketball player, because Father Time's going to win, you're only going to get older, you're only going to get more worn down. And at some point, whatever your body type is, it puts a physical limitation on what you can do and what you can improve on. There's only so much that Steph Curry can do to get better as a player. Now, that being said, he's still the main piece of that team. He's still the most important member outside of maybe Kevin Durant, but he's still the most important face of the Warriors franchise because he's one of the top 5 players in the league, and he's been with that organization his entire career, and he's built a brand with that organization. He can only do so much. Klay Thompson can only do so much. He can only improve so much in the role that he's defined as. Kevin Durant can only do so much in one state, in one place. And I think that, combined with the looming free agency, the potential to go to a place like New York or L.A., Draymond Green having a couple of meltdowns over the course of the season, and obviously having some kind of impact as the years have gone on in a negative fashion. His mentality has cost them big games, including a championship when Cleveland won it in 2016. All of those things are now starting to come to a pass. They're starting to come to a boiling point. At some point in the NBA, with such a small group of core players, you can only achieve a level of success for so long before you reach critical mass. And I think we're getting to that point with Golden State. There's only so much they can do to get better as a team. There's only so much they can do individually with their physical limitation as players. And as time goes on and as they get older, there's only so much they can do. And I think it's finally starting to wear on them. I think the chemistry is breaking down because of all the elements we just talked about. And the league got better. James Harden is coming into his prime. LeBron James comes over to the Lakers. We're seeing Portland start to come into their own this season. Utah is starting to play really well with a second-year star in Donovan Mitchell. We're getting to that point where critical mass is about to be reached, and this is a huge opportunity for the rest of this conference to make a push to try to knock the Warriors off their pedestal.
Talking some ball with ESPN's Adam Amin here on the Gary Harris Show. I'm live here on Audio Avenue at the San Jose Convention Center in California, getting ready for the national championship game on Monday night. The other big marquee matchup last night, Kawhi Leonard returns to San Antonio as a member of the Raptors, and the Spurs took it to him, 125-107. Kawhi played okay, but the story was DeMar DeRozan, who came over in the trade, and he is a really good player. We know that. I don't think people consider him to be the same level of player as Kawhi, but he chooses this game to go for and I was surprised to see this. I figured he would have had a triple-double or two along the line. He gets his first ever career triple-double, 21 points, 14 rebounds, and 11 assists, as this one was never close. After the game, Popovich and Kawhi shared a moment, and Kawhi blamed the media for the fans not embracing his return. But a lot of drama with this game, but San Antonio picked a good night to play one of their better games of the season.
Yeah, they looked excellent. They're 5 games over now. They're still in great shape in the West with that jumbled conference right now. But I'm with you. I would have figured at some point DeMar DeRozan would have had a 10-rebound night, and he would have been. I was surprised to hear that was his first career triple-double as well. And he said, I thought this was a telling thing he said last night. You have to thrive in those moments. And I'm sure there are a lot of Toronto fans out there going, wait. What happened in the playoffs? What happened in the series against Cleveland when we needed you in Game 3? I'm sure there's a lot of people having those thoughts right about now in Toronto. But that being said, DeMar DeRozan is a guy who doesn't necessarily have the consistency to be the alpha player that a lot of people expected him to be. And I hate saying this because I really appreciate what he's done as a player, his skill set overall, what he does off the court. I'm a big DeMar DeRozan fan, but it never felt like he was at the top of the food chain. And perhaps that's not the role he's meant to have. But in a place like San Antonio that thrives in that system on guys just stepping into their role and having some definition in that, and then on certain nights being able to step into a different level of territory and play at an even higher level and be more productive like DeRozan was last night, I think this is the type of place that kind of feeds into what DeMar DeRozan can do at his best. I thought last night was a great example of it. But, I mean, listen, Tim Duncan wasn't overly special. There was nothing flashy about him. It was consistency in his role. He did the fundamental things better than anybody else at that position, at the power forward position. Same thing with Tony Parker. Same thing with Manu Ginobili. All those guys during their heyday, that's what defines San Antonio. And I think this is a great fit. And maybe last night was the first time we finally saw it, and it took about 40 games to get there. But I think this is why the trade is really going to work out great for both sides. And I hope that Kawhi Leonard appreciates what he has what he had in Toronto, or what in San Antonio. I hope he appreciates that, because what he has in Toronto is a great opportunity in front of him to continue to be a growing player with less pressure on him, because he's got great role players around him. I don't think he necessarily felt that in San Antonio. I think he's got a great opportunity in front of him. I'm sure Greg had something to say about that. Greg Popovich had something to say along those lines to him last night. But I was very impressed with what we saw from DeMar DeRozan. The flashes of what Toronto hoped he could be, we saw last night in San Antonio.
No doubt about it. All right, now to the college football playoff national championship game on Monday night here in California. Alabama is the dominant program in the country. Tides earn that. Most of the time when they play a game, you know what's said, Adam. They've got the talent edge, they've got the coaching edge, they've got the depth edge, they've got the been here, done that edge. Not necessarily in this game. Clemson under Dabo Swinney has built a program very close to Alabama. They beat them 2 years ago. They've got, I think, very similar talent, great coaching pedigree, been here, done that. They have become the challenger to Alabama, and I guess some will argue if Clemson wins on Monday night that maybe they will have supplanted the Tide as the dominant program. I'm with you. I hear a lot of people talking about apathy. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to see it. I think this is awesome. I mean, you got the king of the hill, and you got the team that would be the king of the hill going to settle it one more time. I think this is great drama, and I think this is great for college football, but not everybody seems to agree. Why is that?
You know, I think there is some apathy because of, certainly the site. Like, listen, Santa Clara is not the most appealing site this time of year. I'm sure that's part of it. It's not Atlanta like it was. I mean, last year was so much fun, Gary. It was Atlanta with Georgia and Alabama. I mean, it was an atmosphere in that new palatial stadium. It's going to be hard to top that, especially considering the game. Like, the game, that was one of the best finishes of all time in that city, in close proximity to two outstanding programs. So I understand that we're coming off quite the high from last year going into this weekend. That I understand. I understand the frustrations of what's surrounding these two teams, even though they have no part in the problem with expansion or the push for expansion in the playoff. These are the two best teams in the country. They were going to be here no matter what. I don't care if you had a 16-team, a 32-team, or a 64-team playoff. These were the teams that feel like we're going to be there at the end of it. It's only happened one time, I think, where the teams that started 1-2 in the AP poll at the beginning of the season are going to finish 1-2 in the AP poll. I think that was 2005, which ended with the 2006 Rose Bowl, Vince Young and US against USC. And that, I think that's the only time that's ever happened. So this shouldn't be a shock that it's these two teams. I think the fatigue comes from the periphery surrounding the game. Expansion, should we or should we not? All the semifinals were so boring. There's clearly no talent disparity, or there's a huge talent disparity between 1 and 2 and the rest of the country. So why should we even care? It's just an inevitable finish that we're coming to. So I'm sure it's a lot more to do around the game, around the matchup, than it does the matchup itself. Because when you and I and everybody else who enjoys and loves college football watches this and sees the setup and sees what it's become, I don't know how you don't love it. I mean, this is great. This is what this is like Bobby Bowden, Bob Stoops. This is Florida State, Florida in the 1990s. This is Oklahoma, Texas at the turn of the century. Like, this is what you want. You want rivalries to be built. And I don't know how you don't define this as such. After 4 rounds in playoff games and the third time we're seeing it in the championship, I think it has a lot more to do with the periphery of the game, and maybe that's where the frustration comes in rather than the game itself.
Real quickly, before I let you go, I know there's so many key matchups, whether it's the defensive lines versus the offensive lines. Both these wide receiving cores are talented. It can make big plays. Could it come down, though, to which quarterback plays the best in a game where you're so evenly matched or seem to be evenly matched? Will it come down at the end of the day to just which quarterback, whether it's Lawrence or Tagovailoa, that shines on this stage that will lead their team to victory?
And not to do the old Occam's razor thing, but usually the answer is the simplest one that's right in front of you, and I think that is the case. I think it ends up being Lawrence. And if you really want to nitpick it, I think it's Lawrence against Thompson and Surtain and that back end of Alabama that's been so good this year. I think it's how he can dissect it and penetrate it, if at all. And remember, he's got some great receivers, T. Higgins, Amari Rodgers. Like he's got a staff receiving core, and everybody seems to be healthy, even though a couple of the receivers left the game against Notre Dame in the second half. They seemingly will be healthy. I think it's Tagovailoa against the safeties of Clemson. Remember, they gave up some major yardage this year to Texas A&M, to South Carolina. They had some soft spots in the back end, right up the middle of the field. And Tua is so good with the deep ball this year. If you get a couple post routes or have a couple of players down the seam where he can pick them apart, I think those are the specifics of the matchup. But in its essence, that's what all we're talking about. Which quarterback has the ability to beat the other defense down the field, and which quarterback is going to be more efficient, not turn the ball over. I think it's that simple. When you get into a game like this that is so dynamic, with every position group so talented and so good at its best, I think it comes down to the guy who's got the ball in his hands more often than anybody else on the field. It's Lawrence and Tagovailoa, and I think at the end of it, more than likely, whatever their numbers are will closely, if not fully, reflect what the final score is going to be.
It's going to be exciting. Levi Stadium in Santa Clara on Monday night. Adam, I know that every ESPN outlet's going to have a different angle on this. I know the film room is going to feature the Monday Night Football team and Monday Night Football crew, and there's so many different angles. Will you be coming out this year?
I'll be on the sidelines with Steve Levy from the pregame show all the way to the final snap. And we'll be on ESPN2. We'll give you what's called the field pass for the entire pregame show and for the entirety of the game. Steve and I will call the game from the sidelines, as I've done the last several years, and Steve's very excited to be joining us. And we'll be joined by a casting crew of several ESPN personalities and otherwise to help us call the game. But it's more about the unique perspective on the field that we're giving you. And hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you want to flip over, feel free to ESPN2. If not, enjoy the main telecast. Just either way, try to enjoy the game. And I know a lot of Alabama fans aren't making the trip out there. And like I said, for the same reasons we already discussed, but enjoy this game. Enjoy the fact that Clemson is fighting you for the top spot in college football. Enjoy the fact that Dabo has built what he's built, and enjoy and appreciate what Nick Saban continues to do. I think when you look at it from that perspective, it's much, much more enjoyable than trying to dissect it from every angle of what makes college football a frustrating sport at this time.
It's going to be fun, and hopefully I'll get a chance to see you before the game. Thanks so much, Adam.
Looking forward to seeing you, buddy.